So John Green is back at it again. Some people know him as the author of various novels, including ones that make grown men cry. However, if you're a history buff like me, or you attended middle school or high school after the year 2012, you know him as an educator on various topics, such as history, religion, civics, and more. He's like the Bill Nye of those topics. Well, he made a video about DOGE, Elon's government efficiency department, and he exposed it as an obvious scam. And so let's listen to what he has to say.
I think one of the broadest misconceptions about the US government at the moment is that the Trump administration is cutting the size of the federal government through the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. In fact, in each of the first 3 months of the Trump administration, despite mass layoffs of federal workers and mass cuts to foreign aid and science research, the federal government has spent more in 2025 than it did in 2024 or 2023. Also, the margin is going up, not down. In short, the federal government is getting bigger and more expensive, and the federal deficit is also increasing. So if you're arguing that DOGE is good because they're cutting the deficit and spending, or you're arguing that DOGE is bad because they're cutting the deficit and spending, in both cases, I just disagree with your presupposition. And yet, at the same time, it's true that tens of thousands of people are losing their jobs, and there have been severe cuts to foreign aid and science spending. So what's going on here? So first, it's important to understand how the federal government actually spends its money. So yes, tens of thousands of employees of the federal government have been laid off in the last few months, but all...
That number is actually low. It's well over 100,000 now. Over 100,000 government workers have either been laid off or fired altogether.
Federal employees combined only account for about 5% of US federal government spending. So even losing 10% of them, which is far more than have been fired thus far, would mean only cutting the budget by about 0.5%. The same is true for cuts to things like foreign aid and USAID. Altogether, that only accounts for about 1/2 of 1 cent of our tax dollar. So like George W. Bush's program PEPFAR that has saved tens of millions of lives, all the money for the Global Fund that fights HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis, all of USAID, etc., all of that is only about 0.5% of the US federal budget. Cuts to it do not meaningfully matter to overall federal spending, but they are very politically divisive, which means they get a lot of attention, which makes it look like they're significant cuts. So US federal spending looks like this. We spend about 21% of all federal money on Social Security, our retirement plan for seniors. Another 15% goes to Medicare, our national program to provide health care for seniors. 13% goes to national defense, 13% goes to Medicaid, and 13% goes to interest on the debt, which will be going up again because we are spending more money and also taking less in. So right there, that's 75% of federal spending. Benefits for veterans are another 6%. Unemployment benefits, retirement benefits for federal workers, nutrition support add up to about 11%. USAID and much more fall into that 3% of other, and so even very minor increases in spending for big ticket items like defense mean that the US is spending more in 2025 than we were in 2024, despite hollowing out scientific research and foreign aid and other minor spending categories. The things we're cutting just aren't very significant. I mean, they're very significant in the sense that they've saved tens of millions of lives and fueled research that saved tens of millions more, but I mean, they're not like expensive. Also,
so much of the government spending that has been cut by DOGE has been programs and agencies that are not very expensive in the grand scheme of like the entire budget. For example, USAID, like you just mentioned, the NIH, the National Institute of Health. Trump recently just slashed funding for the National Institute of Health, the NIH, which is a government agency that does research and development on diseases, and it helps prevent and detect all kinds of diseases. It's a vital agency, yet it costs so little. It takes up a fraction of a percent of our federal budget.
So we're collecting fewer taxes, which is another reason why the budget deficit and federal debt are increasing faster than they were last year. Now, there may eventually come a time when there's a cut to the overall federal budget, but we haven't seen that yet, and frankly, we're unlikely to see it as long as everybody is focused on these tiny, tiny categories of spending. Like, you're just not going to get there by firing federal employees or canceling politically divisive small projects like heating support for low-income families or whatever, because there just isn't enough money in them. Instead, we are cutting things to make it look and sound like we are cutting things. This isn't like serious austerity being implemented by DOGE to bring down the debt or deficit or whatever. This is a political choice made to enact a political worldview, and you can agree or disagree with that political worldview, just don't labor under the delusion that it makes the federal government less expensive. If you actually wanted to cut the deficit, you would have to implement real austerity measures, which would probably mean both decreasing spending and increasing taxes. That's what countries do when they're in an actual austerity mode. They cut spending spending on big ticket items like national defense and benefits for seniors, and they also raise taxes. So to be clear, fighting about whether to cut foreign aid is a political argument, not an economic one. It is quite literally like spending $10,000 a month with your spouse on rent and then having an argument with your spouse over whether you can afford one $50 dinner per month. Like, the problem is not the dinner. So I just think...
Man, what a great analogy. So Elon Musk, who, by the way, was not elected by the American people and is not a confirmed cabinet member, is saying that these social safety nets, these programs, have so much fraud and that we need to cut spending in these programs so the US government can save money and to reduce the deficit. The co-presidents, Trump and Musk, have stated that this is their goal. In a recent Republican spending bill, $88 billion is being cut from Medicaid over the next 10 years. That's healthcare to low-income pregnant women. That's healthcare for children in foster care. Healthcare for people with disabilities. And it's healthcare for low-income seniors. It's essential services that are being drastically cut. And for what? To save $88 billion over the next 10 years, which is only $8.8 billion per year in savings. The federal budget, at least last year, was about $7 trillion. That $8.8 billion that they would be saving each year from cutting Medicaid spending is 0.0012% of the budget. And yet it's a top focus of this administration. Let me say that again. 0.0012% of the budget. We should not be focused on cutting these essential programs that cost so little. If we're going to slash funds in one of the major spending categories, it needs to be the military, defense spending. The Pentagon has failed, 7 audits in a row now? And they've confirmed that they cannot account for 60% of their budget. 60% of their entire budget, which, by the way, is hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars, goes unaccounted for. They cannot pass an audit. We spend billions per year on maintaining the American empire. We have 750 military bases in over 80 countries. It's our third biggest expense. Military spending is 13% of the budget. Billions of their budget goes toward funding dictatorships around the world. It goes to funding countless war crimes, an obvious genocide and ethnic cleansing that is happening in Gaza. Our tax money is being used to manufacture weapons that Israel is using to carpet bomb babies. Here is a great place to start to cut funding if you want to cut billions of dollars from the budget. If your goal is to make the government more efficient, the Trump administration in just 2 months has cut spending for pediatric cancer research, cut spending for the NIH, like I said, which does all types of research, including a 30-year study on diabetes that just got completely dropped. They cut funding for universities that do essential medical and scientific research simply because their students are protesting a genocide that Trump supports. They've cut the Department of Education in half, which obviously provides all kinds of essential services to our students throughout the country, especially students with disabilities. Elon is threatening to cut Social Security, which of course millions of older Americans rely on. They just cut spending for Meals on Wheels, which is a program that provides food to people who are not physically able to prepare their own food. You see what I mean? All of those things that I just listed are essential services that our government provides to our people. And it just so happens that those programs and services that I listed are also so cheap. They're a fraction of a percent of our federal budget. And yet, it's still the focus of this administration to cut these instead of cutting spending for the Pentagon, which has failed several audits in a row and cannot account for hundreds of billions of dollars. It's pathetic. This administration is focused on cutting spending for healthcare and food services for low-income people, elderly people, people with disabilities, instead of cutting funding for perpetuating endless wars. Instead of cutting spending for actual useless projects, like the $400 million federal contract Tesla just got to make armored vehicles. That's right. $400 million of our tax money just went to a giant subsidy to Tesla, Elon Musk's company, to make armored vehicles. But yet we're cutting funding for healthcare and for food services for elderly and for the disabled. Make that make sense, please. $400 million in taxpayer money just so Elon Musk can go play around with making armored vehicles. Meanwhile, they're cutting funding for your grandma's healthcare. They're cutting funding for the program that delivers food to your 90-year-old widow grandpa who lives alone and can't afford to live in a nursing home and is forced to stay home and struggle to prepare his own meals, Trump's giving a big middle finger to the millions of marginalized Americans who are struggling to get by. And while at the same time, increasing defense spending to fund the forever wars. And he hasn't said anything about the hundreds of billions of our tax dollars that goes to corporate welfare, giving tax breaks and subsidies to corporations that monopolize and absorb housing and groceries and healthcare, which are making things unaffordable. So Boeing, which is the airplane manufacturer and huge defense contractor that makes missiles and other weapons, has alone received $16 billion in government subsidies. $16 billion of our tax money has gone to Boeing to create missiles and to create bombs that kill people. Our economy is not working for everyday people. It's working for large corporations and the ultra wealthy. And millions of us Americans are so gullible to believe that Elon Musk, the world's richest man, a robber baron who has spent his entire life consolidating wealth and power, that he wants to help us out? Are you f***ing kidding me? Just that description on his face should already prove to you that he does not have our best interest in mind. There are countless examples of essential programs and agencies that DOGE has cut, while at the same time increasing government contracts for Elon's companies. That's blatant corruption if I've ever seen it. Your brain is absolutely cooked if you think that DOGE or Elon is actually helping us, is actually making our government more efficient. It's all a diversion. It's a diversion. They want us to think that they're making the government more efficient, but all it's doing is giving more wealth and power to the ultra rich while making it absolutely clear that there is no safety net program or service that they won't cut to make it happen. Here's my PSA to everyone listening. If you don't step up and make your voice heard, we are cooked. Call your local representative or senator, tell them to grow a spine and oppose every single terrible action of this administration. And in the meantime, show up to the protests. Last week, there were thousands of protests all over the country, in every state. Show up and do something. Because we sure as heck cannot rely on Democratic leadership right now. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and other feckless, spineless Democrats who are bending the knee to Trump right now, just so they can posture as, oh, look, I'm so bipartisan. Look at me, I'm half Democrat, half Republican. Wow, look at me, I'm not getting any of the Democratic platform accomplished. But that's okay because moderates love me. That reminds me, I get email updates from my local representatives and from other elected officials in my state here in Michigan. Senator Gary Peters emailed us and he bragged that he was rated the most bipartisan Democrat in the Senate. And apparently this is the third time in a row that he's won this award, that he's been recognized for this. He said he won this because he's the most willing to reach across the aisle to work on common causes. That's extremely dishonest framing. You know what it actually means? It means that he's the Democrat that most often votes with Republicans. He's Republican light. Like, he's a Republican ordered from Timu. He's just John Fetterman, but with a working brain. It's ridiculous. Anyway, to end this video, I'll just say that I hope everyone understands that DOGE is cutting spending. But it's for your grandma's healthcare. It's for children's cancer research. It's for Meals on Wheels. It's so obvious to me that this whole DOGE thing is a diversion. Don't look now, but the robber barons are running out the back door with all of our tax money.